It's my privilege today to introduce Major General Bernard Loeffke.
I'm going to ask you to do something unusual. I want you to stand up and hold hands. I don't want you to kiss each other, just hold hands. This is what we did in my unit after we ran 5 miles every Friday. So Mark, hold his hand. Every Friday at the end of 5 miles with weapons, we did this. Are there any foreign officers here, allied officers? Where are you from, sir?
Hungary.
Where?
Hungary.
Anybody else? Where are you guys from? Anybody else?
Albania, here.
All right. Would you all mind if you would just be an American for this song? Would you just mind if you're Americans just for this song? Please repeat after me. I'm proud to be an American. I can't hear you. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men and women who gave. No, I'm singing by myself. Come on, guys, let's do it all again. Are you ready? Here we go. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men and women who gave that right to me. And I'll gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, because there is no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. You did that halfway good. Give yourselves a hand. Okay, keep holding hands. You can go ahead and say, here's an old general that asked us to hold hands from the very beginning. Now what I want you to do is something a little bit different. Just repeat after me. We're all a family.
We're all a family.
Friends to my right.
Friends to my right.
Friends to my left.
Friends to my left.
With one purpose only.
With one purpose only.
Friendship.
Friendship.
Thank you. Airborne. Why am I here? Before I begin, let me interrupt 1 second. I'm very proud to have General Cabeza with us. Sir, could you please stand up? Have they recognized you yet? General Cabeza is a great general officer who, in my active duty, he was a guiding light for many of us. Now he's the president of the museum here. Thank you for coming, General Cabeza. Why am I here? I'm here because of that sergeant to your left. Name, Sergeant Larry Morford. Incredible human being. He has guided my life ever since Viet Nam. This is a soldier who did not believe in war, yet he volunteered for Vietnam. He didn't believe in war as the way to solve issues. However, he volunteered. And he was one of the sergeants in my unit, because at that time, the veteran sergeants were either wounded or had gotten killed. So we made sergeants out of raw soldiers that came into our units. And the outstanding part of Larry Morford, when I asked him, why did you join the Army? Since you don't believe in war, you don't believe that we should be here. He simply said, sir, I could not stay home when my people were fighting here. He was killed 15 days before coming home. He changed my life. He changed my life, and every morning when I wake up, I say, thank you, Larry. He put my path on a specific road. His famous statement is, sir, the job you and I are doing here is the job of a beast. We're out here in the jungle killing each other. The least beastly of us should be doing it. He volunteered for every dangerous mission. He was killed leading a patrol as a sergeant in Point, 199th Light Infantry Brigade. He's been the role model for me to follow. Yes, he did say that. The job that you and I are doing is the job of a beast, and the least beastly of us should be doing it. But I'm also reminded that a very famous religious leader, Cardinal Spellman, said, "If I had not been a priest, I would have been a soldier." Because the soldiers and priests, their mission is similar. Protect the innocent, right injustice when it has been done, and give shelter to those that are looking for it. So Larry Morford is what Cardinal Spellman was saying. If I had not been a priest, I would have been a soldier, because our mission is one of selfless service. So when Larry died, my whole life was changed. My son, would you stand up, Mark? This is my son, and he has been with me all over the world. When I retired from the Army, I went to medical school and became a medical missionary. At age 14, he was with me as a medical assistant. And he's been with me in Haiti and Viet Nam, in Kenya, and lots of other places. Thank you, son. The reason that I say that about Morford is because to his left is a corporal. Now, open up your brochure, and in your brochure, you will see the bios of these two soldiers. On the left is Sergeant Morford, and on the right is Corporal Lei Feng. If you remember anything out of this audience, remember Lei Feng. He's more famous than any Chinese general or marshal. They have more museums for Lei Feng than we have for our President of the United States. We have less than 16, I think, General Cabeza, 16 presidential museums. They have more than 100. And the reason for it is that he was not such a great combat leader. He was a truck driver. Why should there be museums for a corporal that was a truck driver? And the reason is very simple. He spent every minute of his spare time helping others. All of his money he gave to orphanages. He would wake up in the middle of the night and stoke up the furnaces of widows. So when the country was going through real chaos in China, they chose Lei Feng as a role model of selfless service. And that's why I have him there. Because right now I have fire in my belly. Fire in the belly that makes you want to get up every morning and go to work because you have a vision. If you don't have a vision, get one. Get one. Remember John Kennedy, our president, one of the best that we've had. He had a vision, and a vision's got to have motion, action in order to be alive. And what he had is a vision to get to the moon. Sputnik had already been there, and the Russians were beating us to it. What Kennedy says, at the end of this decade, we will have a man walking on the moon and bring him back safely. We didn't have any rockets. We didn't know how to get to the moon, but he gave the nation that vision. In the end of a decade, we will have a man on the moon walking, and we'll bring him back. So it's putting fire in the belly. If you don't have a vision that makes you want to come home every day and says, God almighty, I want to go back to work tomorrow. That's my vision now, is to make sure we don't fight Chinese again. Because out here, General Cabeza has a museum, and in there is a wall of Vietnam. A lot of those names need not be there. They shouldn't be there. And the reason they shouldn't be there, because there was no need to have been fighting Chinese. Colonel Streeter, would you come over and shake my hand? Thank you. Thank you. Did I shake hands with him? No, I refused to shake hands with him. Thank you. Thank you. That was the policy. In 1954, John Foster Dulles said, if you will see a Chinese, take a hostile look. Do not shake hands with Chinese diplomats. So from 54 to 1972, we did not speak with the Chinese. We didn't talk to them. We didn't shake their hands. And during that time, we fought them in Korea, and the Chinese helping the Vietnamese fight us in Vietnam. If we had been talking to the Chinese, a lot of names on that wall, General Cabeza, wouldn't be on that wall. Because all the weaponry that we were fighting against was Chinese and Russian. I have very intimate relations with the Chinese. I was wounded by a Chinese mortar. My West Point classmate was killed by a Chinese mine. The man that changed my life was killed by a Chinese bullet. I had these ghosts of the 34 men in my battalion in the 199th, the 2nd, or the 3rd that are on that wall on my mind. This could have been prevented. It could have, if we had had conversations with the Chinese. There's a famous statement that goes this way: when people stop talking, people start dying. Do it. Write it down if you want to learn. When we stop talking, people start dying. As you grow up in military, make sure that you make the effort to speak to those who you think are the enemies. Why should you listen to me? Well, listen to me because I've been in Moscow 4 years. I've been in China 4 years. I've been wounded in combat. As the colonel mentioned, I've competed in decathlon in Moscow. I know the Chinese well. I know the Russians well. Why should you listen? Because I have some ideas on how we can prevent war. And you are in the most important career in your life, lieutenant and captain. The whole Army is based on what you will learn as a lieutenant captain. A company is just more platoons. A battalion is just more companies. A regiment is just more battalions. So what you learn here is the basis of your future. I've never met a good company commander who was a bad lieutenant. I've never met a good battalion commander who was a bad company commander. If there is one rule on how to be outstanding, is make every minute count. Don't waste your time by going over to the officers' club. Don't waste your time in sitting down and watching TV. Get educated, because you're in a branch, you're in a career that the screw-ups that you do in combat will reflect on what you did in preparation. Now, I feel that I have been very lucky. And I've been lucky because I've been given opportunities that few people have had. I call it, I've been in 6 wars. Today, I will open it up. I just did this for you a week ago because I thought there's nothing more important than to be talking to lieutenants and captains. 6 wars, I call them. The first war was Special Forces. That was back in 1959. If you look at the Vietnam War, everything you see, it says 1962 as we started. We didn't. We started in 59. I know, because I was in the first team of special forces to hit the ground. And you have here at Fort Benning, Bull Simons, who was my commander in that first group that we went into Laos to fight and to train. That was back in 59. They took me out of the 82nd, threw me into Special Forces simply because I could speak French. I was a second lieutenant. Special Forces didn't take second lieutenant, but they hauled me there because I was a French speaker. And they gave that the impetus of my career, because I was the first in my class to have combat because I spoke French. So there's your lesson. Learn languages. That's number 2. Write it down. Learn languages. Don't ever go to a country without some ammunition of some words to be a speaker of that particular language. So write those down. Whenever you get deployed, if you don't speak a couple of words, shame on you. Shame on you. The Army's got a fabulous system where you can learn languages. So that's number 2. Let me keep going on these wars. The first war was very enlightening to me because it was the Special Forces. The West Point classmates of mine, I didn't know where I was. I disappeared. They dropped me from the rolls because it was a secret war. For 2 years, they didn't know where I was. And I couldn't tell them until 7 years ago. There's a 50-year clause for a secret war. So go ahead and write it down. We began the Vietnam War when? 59 with Special Forces. And that's how I'm building you up. That was the first war. The second war was in 1964 for me. And that was the Advisor War. I was with the Vietnamese Parachute Brigade. There's a lot of veterans from Vietnam that think we were the only ones fighting there. This little Vietnamese parachute battalion that I was the advisor to, 500 men and 1 woman. 500 men. After the year in that battalion, 260 were dead or wounded. They fought. They were brave. They were courageous. But a lot of people don't know about it because the correspondents were interested in U.S. troops, and there weren't many troops in '64. Every battalion in the Vietnamese Army then had advisors. 1 captain, I was the captain, 1 lieutenant, and 1 sergeant, the 3 of us. I was very blessed with having a lieutenant by the name of Carpenter. You might have heard of William Carpenter. He was an All-American at West Point. He was called the Lonesome End because he never went back into the huddle. He always stayed out. The Lonesome End. He was the Heisman Trophy winner of West Point. And here we end up together. He's my lieutenant. And I remember one time we had an assault on a wood line. And it was always the battalion commander and I, since I was supposedly the advisor of this battalion commander. He knew a hell of a lot more than I did. And we were off on the first ship. Carpenter, as a lieutenant, was on the last ship, and the sergeant was in the middle. One day, we had a fierce battle, and we were coming out. And again, we were last, but Carpenter was first. Have you got everybody? Yes, sir. Are you all right? Yes, sir. He was not all right. He had been wounded in the arm, but he didn't want to leave the Vietnamese behind. They fixed him up, and I didn't know he was wounded until we landed in Saigon. When we landed in Saigon, the correspondents were everywhere. It made news all over the United States. The Lonesome End in a Lonesome War, Bill Carpenter. Amazing individual. After that, he went to the 101st and fought as a battalion commander. He's famous because they were assaulting, North Vietnamese army was assaulting his position, and they were overrunning him. So he called for fire to be dropped on him, aircraft. What he didn't know is that the aircraft that he was asking to drop only had napalm, and they dropped napalm on him and his troops. Several were burned, but the troops withdrew. So William Carpenter did amazing things of courage, but the Advisor War gave me a hell of a respect for some of these Vietnamese troops. They were incredibly courageous. They refused medals, because if you received a medal, the Viet Cong or the NVA would put the name in the newspapers of the NVA that the families should be assassinated. So if you did a valorous war against the enemy, the families would be targeted. They couldn't kill everybody, but it's like the mafia. If you kill 1%, the word gets through. I'm not going to spend more time on the other wars because as we go along, I'll mention it. But this was the first war, and you can see me as a second lieutenant. I don't know why they killed the breasts. I guess you can't show breasts openly in Fort Benning. But this was Special Forces with the males, and this was 1959. And we were training them, and then at times we fought them. Like I mentioned to you, the commander there was Bull Simons. We were working for the agency at that time. We were in civilian clothes. And Bull Simons was very tough with us. And he says, if you get into a fight, you stay with them. However, he was in conflict with the ambassador, because the ambassador says, no special forces is to be captured, because we're not supposed to be here. So we withdrew as they were overrunning a base camp. I will never forget that. The people we were training looking as we boarded aircraft to get us out of there before they overran. Then we would be doing the same thing in Saigon later on. So we trained with them, and at times when we needed, we fought them. The Second War. Here is my battalion commander that I'm supposed to advise. This is Captain Hung. Wounded 8 times. Fighting about 20 years with the French. Unbelievable leader. My advisor to him, I learned more from him than anything I've ever learned from other leaders. When we were fighting and the bullets were coming, I was on the ground scratching to get even more space away from the bullets coming. Dai Wei was standing around, says, over here, over here. That's why he was wounded 8 times. The men loved him. The men worshiped him. But this is the kind of leaders I knew in the Vietnamese army. So when you defame some of the Vietnamese, you're really doing a disservice. And the commander of the airborne brigade was a man by the name of General Cao Van Bien. When we assaulted near Cambodia, we parachuted in there. We were ambushed. Because there was a law that 5 miles to the border, we didn't have helicopters or support. So that's where the enemy was. He was wounded in the initial battle. And we were out in the open. The unit was out in the open. And he gets up, wounded, blew his whistle, and is the first one out to charge the wood line. And they went ahead and charged the wood line. And then we did get helicopters. When they found out we had so many wounded, they broke the law, and they did come in to take the wounded out. This commander refused to leave until every one of his wounded was on the airplane. He took his pistol out. I will shoot anybody who picks me up. And he made general right then and there. And Cao Bien was one of the true leaders that I emulate. So I've had a lot of role models, and these two were parts of them. Now he comes, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, and you all ought to be very proud to be associated with the 199th. Did they introduce you all? Did they introduce you? And for me, it's a great honor to be called the honorary colonel of the 199th because I've had some tough times with that unit. But it was conventional units in an unconventional war. And then again, the lieutenants and captains are the ones that fought that war. But this is one of the unconventional things because every time we pop smoke, the smoke goes through the canopy and the enemy knows where we are. It's like my having to write a letter to a congressman who complained that one of our troops, hadn't had a shower for 2 weeks. And I said, that's correct. It might be a month that they won't have a shower. So, Congressman, this shower, when you're clean, the enemy smells you, and that causes more death. So you're correct, sir. I have not given the men a shower. Shame on me. But in this unconventional war, one of the things that we did is we issued signal climbers, trees, to go all the way up the tree, and then we blew up a balloon and put the balloon through the canopy so that the helicopters, when they came in, they could see where we were instead of popping smoke. And everybody, they had tree climbers too, and they would see the smoke and they knew that units were there. So what the helicopters would do is they would just fly at treetop level, and the enemy never knew where we dropped the supplies because they dropped it with a balloon. So that's one of the few things that I wanted to give you an idea of what we did in the unconventional war. 199th Light Infantry Brigade, it's the only general officer in Vietnam that was killed in the ground, fighting on the ground. We had general officers killed, but they crashed or they were shut down. The 199th had the only general officer killed on the ground. This man was unbelievable. General Bill Bond. He was with the Rangers in World War II. Anzio Beachhead was captured by the Germans, escaped. He was with Darby's Rangers, escaped, and then he took over the brigade. He was killed about 30 days after that. Were you there when Bill Bond was killed? That was a great loss. This was a man that would have made the highest ranks. And I think that the thing that made me very cognizant is that you, as a lieutenant, as a captain, need to get ideas and feedback from the troops that you lead. I had 97% draftees in the battalion. I don't know what you all were averaging about that. 97% of the people we were fighting with were draftees. They didn't want to be in Vietnam. They didn't want to be in the Army. We were so hard up for soldiers that judges would give the opportunity for a convicted felon to go into the Army or go to jail. So we had people that weren't high school graduates. Here, now, we have the volunteer Army. You've got good people. I was in Iraq in 2005 as a medical missionary. I can tell you, I am very proud of our Army, seeing what they were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was hard commanding a unit that was 97% draftees. Our jails were full. The jails back here were full, refusals, but our jails in Vietnam were full of capacity. I know in my battalion we had to hold a couple of the refusals in the unit because the jails in Saigon and other places couldn't hold anymore. So I had to take soldiers to guard the, but these, the majority of them weren't bad. They weren't bad soldiers. They just said, nobody gives a damn back in the US. Why should we go out and get killed? So that's the kind of leadership we had. And the only way to solve it is by company commanders and lieutenants going out in patrol. And this is Citizen Jenkins. I remember him well. I would change places 5 times a week with a soldier. And if he was a mortarman, I would take the place of a mortarman. If he was a rifleman, I would take. And he had to go back and sleep in my tank, had to go back and sleep in my tent and get a hot meal. The only requirement was that he write a letter telling me what went right and what went wrong. And I remember Citizen Jenkins very well. He was killed about 4 weeks after he wrote the letter. But he was a comedian of sorts. He wrote me the letter, and it was a very useful letter, but he ends it up by saying, "Sir, I like what you're doing, but I still don't like officers." And then he went on to say, "My favorite prayer goes this way. Let the bullets be distributed as you do the pay. Let the officers get most of them." And unless the officer is willing to be out there, just like the infantry motto says, "Follow me," you're going to have discomfort. With our 97% draftees, we never had a disciplinary action. Yes, we had refusals and said, "Sir, with all due respect, please send me to jail. I just don't want to get killed. The war is winding down." So that was real leadership challenges. Citizen Jenkins is useful today. My 4th war, I call it the Kissinger War. That was an incredible time in the White House. This was taken about 2 months ago, 2016, when I went to Austin, Texas for the 50th anniversary of the Viet Nam War at the museum there. The Kissinger War was incredible for me because I'm yanked out of the 199th and sent to Washington saying, "You will work in the White House now for Dr. Kissinger." So I'm yanked out, I get in an airplane, and then I try to report into the White House. I couldn't get in. Look at the time, 1971. I couldn't get in. There were massive demonstrations against the Vietnam War. I'm finally escorted in. They make a gateway. I get into the White House grounds, and guess who would be there? The sister battalion of the unit I had been fighting with in Vietnam just 2 weeks. They had the Old Guard battalion, part of the 199th, inside the White House to repel American citizens trying to demonstrate against the war. Those were tough days. And I spent a year with Dr. Kissinger. He sent me right back to Vietnam 6 months into it to help prepare a paper on withdrawal. But reason that I put it there is the Kissinger War. He spent all that year trying to get the Chinese in with us, opening up so as to convince them to come in and stop the war because it was breaking our nation apart. Then just a month ago, I see him again, 2016, a long time. And the first thing he says, "I've forgotten a lot. Tell me, did I treat you well?" And he didn't treat anybody well. Kissinger was a taskmaster I learned a great deal from. But it was from Kissinger that my Chinese adventure started, because working for him allowed me to go to China in 1973 to be the first infantry officer in there alongside General Colin Powell, who was a young lieutenant colonel. Both of us, 1973, crossed into China, and we were both with little butterflies because he had been wounded too in Vietnam, and as we crossed the bridge into China, he says, "How you feel, Bern?" I said, "Oh, a little queasy. I see an AK-47 there. I've never met that with the Chinese." So as we walked across the bridge, we were in China, and that changed my life on how I think of China. The fifth war, after I left the Army, I went out to medical school and became a medical missionary. So for 10 years, I've been in and out of Africa. And this is the kind of missions we did. We didn't have electricity. You can see it, we're doing by flashlight. We didn't have running water. Yes, we did. We had Africans running from the river with pails of water. We reused our gloves. We didn't have anesthesia, but ketamine that you use for dogs. This is the kind of medicine that I'm used to, of missionary medicine. So I've done that for 10 years. The enemy said that if we captured them, we would crucify them. But we didn't crucify the North Sudanese. They crucified our soldiers because many of them were Christians. So it was a war where I saw how hate can breed more hate. And what we did with the Sudanese that I was the surgeon for is that if you get a wounded soldier, you will treat him alongside our wounded. You will treat him the same way that we treat ours. You will feed them the same way. And after you heal them, let them go. Let them go, sir? Yes, let them go. And this is the biggest weapon that we had, because the enemy would go back to their lines and say, they didn't crucify me, they treated me alongside. So this is your takeaway lesson. Write it down. The biggest asset you have is the prisoners that you catch. The biggest asset that you have is the prisoners that you catch. Treat them well. If they're wounded, treat them alongside your own wounded so they know they're getting the same treatment. Change the enemy's mind. Violence breeds violence. It just escalates. So remember, a POW is the greatest asset that you have. I would go ahead and say that my greatest mission right now is what you see on the right. China and the US and Latin America. Colonel Vera, would you stand up, please? Coronel Vera, usted se puede levantar. No. I don't know if you know him. He's the acting commander of WINSEC right now, Colonel Vera. And then you have a colonel from Honduras. And these two officers probably have had more combat than many of us. How many of you have been in Afghanistan and Iraq? Quite a few. How many of you have been wounded? Okay. How many are you going back? You haven't gotten orders yet. But why don't you do that again? How many in Iraq and Afghanistan? Quite a few. These two have been in Iraq and Afghanistan of their own, battling for about 30 years. They know about war a hell of a lot more than any of us. You get to know them. They're right down the hill from you. That's WINSEC. Por favor, invítelos para que conozcan a los oficiales ahí. You got to get to know them. There's a lot that you can learn from them. But this is the most important thing. Thank you, Coronel Vera. This is the most important thing I can be doing now. And that is to be part of making friends out of enemies. How much time do I have? How much? 7 minutes? 12 minutes. This is John Glenn. He was the first astronaut to go around the world when he was in his capsule. And he noticed that the NASA had given him a bunch of cards. And each one of these cards were written the words, I am a friend. I come from space, but I'm a friend. Please help me go to the US Embassy. He noticed that as you circled the world, there were a lot of countries, and he had the language for each one of these countries, and the word enemy and stranger were the same. So if you can make a stranger a friend, that reduces the enemy. One of my policies is that the friend of my enemy is my best friend. That's what we need to cater find out who the friend of my enemy is, and then make him a friend and try to convince. Because General Sun Tzu, great philosopher in the Chinese army, said it, great generals win wars by preventing them, by not fighting them. Great generals win wars by not fighting them. I would think that if we do anything with China, we just make sure that we keep our relationships with them again. There are 5 T's. The mind can only capture 5 things in short-range memory. So these are the things that separate us with China. They don't trust us, and we don't trust them. How many of you think China's an enemy? Raise your hand. I'm not going to report on you. Just be truthful. How many of you think Chinese is the enemy? Come on, put your hand all the way out. I see 1 or 2. Don't be afraid. Go ahead, put it out. 2, 3. Any more? Come on. If I were in your audience, I would put my hand up. Let me do it again. How many of you think the Chinese are our enemies? Okay, there's a couple of them. Chinese are not our enemies. We can make them our enemy. You can make anybody our enemy. Mark, will you come up? You told me not to bring you. I'm just going to say, why don't you push me just lightly? As you push somebody, the thing is, thank you, sir. The thing is, you want to push back. So violence begets violence. That's Martin Luther King. And he opened up the way of how to open up friendships. I don't have time to go through this, but that quote from Confucius is very good. I'm not afraid of others not understanding me, but I'm afraid of not understanding others. And you got to understand others as a soldier, because if you're going to deploy anywhere and you don't know the culture, you're in trouble. In Vietnam, in the 199th, we had to teach our soldiers very strongly to respect the Vietnamese, because those dinks, a lot of them, those dinks. And the Vietnamese had a habit of blowing their noses this way. Look, how disgusting. Anybody has a handkerchief here? Do you have a handkerchief? Could I borrow a handkerchief? Does anyone have a handkerchief here? Do you have a handkerchief? They don't issue handkerchiefs? They don't, huh? They don't have handkerchiefs. Do you have a bandana or anything? No? Well, we had handkerchiefs in Vietnam. And the Vietnamese used to look at us. We put the handkerchief in, and then we wrap it up and we put it in our pockets. They used to call us dirt carriers. Dirt carriers. You get the dirt and you put it in and you walk around with it. Theirs is much more sanitary. They just blow the thing and it goes away. Do I have time for questions? Okay, I got 5 more minutes. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and do the next one? This is what I'm afraid of. As we sit here, there are thousands and thousands of our service members deep underground ready to launch. And in the defense budget this year, we've increased the nuclear budget. So we're modernizing our nuclear weapons. We're not reducing it. In 20 minutes or less, we no longer exist if the button goes up. That's the unclassified version. The classified version is less than 20 minutes if the Russians launch for the missiles to hit the United States, and likewise for our missiles to hit them. This is what we call MAD, mutual assured destruction. We both have the capability to destroy each other. Crazy. That's crazy. I was the Army attaché in Moscow, and we passed a special legislation that gave us permission to give new computers to the Soviet Army so that they could modernize their computers that were scheduling us as a target. You think that's crazy? No, I think that was good. Have you ever had a problem with your computers? Raise your hand. And it's 2016. computers can start wars. So we thought, give them new computers, even though they'll be more accurate, but at least they won't screw up. This is how crazy the world is. So instead of mutual assured destruction, I want mutual assured development. And this is to prevent nuclear war. All right, go ahead. Unfortunately, how many of you have seen this before? Okay, most of you have. There's a rabbit there, and then there's a duck there. The duck is kind of aggressive. The rabbit is kind of nice, cuddly. If you look at one, you don't see the other right away. You don't see the other right away. And that's what happens with a lot of Chinese. We have this fixation, if they're not good, if they don't trust them, it'll be that way. I just wanted to bring that out that we need to change our perceptions. This, to me, is extremely important, and that is friendship. Roy, why don't you come on up here? Or better yet, let me have one of you. Yeah, thank you, Roy. What's your name?
Buyar,
And you're from where?
Macedonia.
Вы говорите по-русски? Немножко. Вы не хотите говорить по-русски?
I cannot talk.
Okay. I've been in Macedonia. It's a beautiful country. What are we doing? We're shaking hands. Colonel Streeter, would you come in and try to break us apart? Roy, would you try to break us apart? You hold on to his arm, and you hold on to my arm. Try to break us apart. Okay, that's the kind of friendship we want. The friendship that is so strong that no external force can drop us. Thank you, Roy. And that's what we're looking for, to create a friendship that no external force can cut it off. And here is the evolution of the Chinese character for friendship. Friendship began in the olden times with two hands going in the same direction. If you're a friend, you're going in the same direction. Then it started to evolve, coming together. It took 10 more years. And as your friend, you coordinate what you're doing. And then it started getting closer and closer. This took 50 years to get that ideogram from the left to measure to the right. But in the end, you've got a handshake. And that's, in Chinese, it's called youyi, friendship. And you want to create friendship in China. It's so strong that nobody can cut it off. This is my name in Chinese. I want you to write this down. I want you to write it down. The most important thing that you can have is make an image of your name. What is your name, Captain?
Sir, it's Carson Hami.
What is it?
Carson Hami, sir.
Hami,
Hami, sir.
Hami. Thank you. Hami. Make that name mean something. Ha-mi. It's a beautiful name. It can be ha-me. Or you can say ha-mei, close enough. Ha. What is Mei in Chinese? Mei means beautiful. That's what they call us in Chinese. They call us Meigoren. They call us the beautiful country person. China calls us the beautiful country person. Out of 40,000 ideograms, they call us Meiguo. So what's your name in Chinese?
Beautiful, sir.
Yeah, beautiful. Ha! I'm beautiful. But make something out of your name that people can remember it. Are you going to remember that? My name is very hard to pronounce. What's my name?